pastoral job, but I want you to think about something. Paul wanted to stay in jail many times. And there's a reason why he wanted to stay in jail. Think about this with me. You see, Felix is married to Drusilla. And we're going to find out that Drusilla is one of the sisters of Festus, who comes in a little bit later. But he's married to his sister, and Felix here is interested in Paul. And he wants him to come back over and over again in chapter 24. And if you look at chapter 24, the last couple verses of chapter 24, starting in 22, he wants him to come back, and he really wants to bribe him. Look at what it says in verse 22 of chapter 24. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way. Now Felix knew the way. Felix was a smart man. He had had encounters with the Jews before. He understood the Jewish culture. He understood Christianity. He said, but he put them off, saying, when Lysias, the tribune, comes down, I will decide your case. He's stalling for time. In verse 23, he gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody, but have some liberty, that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and sent for Paul. And, excuse me, I got that wrong. The Drusilla is not the wife of Festus. It's not the sister of Festus, but the sister of Herod Agrippa II. I mean, these family issues of the Herod dynasty are convoluted. I mean, they marry their sisters over and over again, and it's like back and forth. You can't keep track of who's who or what's what in their family, because they're always going back and forth with all these things. But here's what was happening. That Felix, he should have announced it, but he says in verse 25, he reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and the coming judgment. You see, Felix wanted to see if he could get Paul to take a bribe, but Paul kept saying, let me tell you about righteousness. Let me tell you about self-control. Let me tell you about what's going to happen in the future, and that is your judgment. Over and over he said those words, self-control, righteousness, and judgment. It says in verse 26, at the same time, he, meaning Felix, hoped that the money would be given him by Paul, so he sent for him often and conversed with him. He talked with Paul. He was stalling all the time because he wanted to see if Paul would give him a bribe. Verse 27, it says, when 2 years had lapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and describing to the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So Paul's an innocent man here. He's been in prison for, how long does the text say? 2 years, right? 2 solid years. And for Paul, that shows God's hand in it, because if he was let out probably now, he would have been killed. But Paul has been protected by God over and over again. We're looking at this and we see this over and over again. And now Festus comes in. It's his first day on the job. You think he's excited about this first day on the job? Are you excited about Festus' first day on the job? Well, maybe not. But Festus comes in wanting to make sure that people know, I'm in charge. Look what it says in verse 25, verse 1. He says, now the 3 days after Festus arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And you know why he did that? He wanted to let the Jews, who probably got Felix fired from his job, to know who's in charge. Because what did Felix not do that the Jews wanted? What did the Jews want to do with Paul? They wanted to kill him, okay? What did Felix not do? Didn't kill him, just kept him in jail. So many people think that basically the Jews were the people who got Felix fired, and they got a new guy in. And this new guy wanted to go down and meet with these Jewish hierarchy people. They're called the principal men in verse 2. And he wanted to hear their case against Paul. But he wanted to also show them who was boss. Now, Felix was an old fox. He knew Judaism. He knew Christianity. He knew a lot of things. Festus didn't know too much. He was the new kid on the block. He didn't have a lot of experience with Christianity or Judaism. And he comes in to take charge, and he goes down there after 3 days, meets with the chief priests and the prominent men, and they ask him to do them a favor. It's the same word which we get grace, charis. This word favor, it says, and they're saying asking a favor against Paul. In other words, it's a favor that they would really kill Paul. And I'm going to say something about the difference between human grace and divine grace in just a second in this passage. But you'll notice that they're asking something, they're asking Festus to do something that is kind of greasing his hand. They're saying, hey, we're in charge here, you do us a favor. And Festus went down because he wanted to make sure that they knew who was in charge. So there's a game going on. And a lot of people don't like politics. You know, politics gets a bad rap because whenever two people are in a room and there needs to be a decision made, that's my definition of politics. That's when two people are in a room and there has to be a decision, politics occurs. Now there can be good politics and there can be bad politics. There can be godly ways people respond to each other in relationships, and there can be ungodly ways people respond to each other in relationships. And these Jews were responding ungodly. And I think in some ways Festus was trying for fiat power, but remember, over and over, God has the power to complete His mission. Amen. God is going to complete His mission. God is going to use the circumstances of Felix, of Festus, of the Jews, of Paul, and all of these things are going to be used to further the kingdom of God, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The things that are going on in life, God is going to use. God not only uses it, He ordains them. And He ordains them for the good of His people and for the glory to His name. If you look at what's going on here, they request Festus to give favor, and they want to kill Paul basically, but the Jews present serious charges. It says, if you look at it in verse 3, where does it say? It says, and verse 3, it says they were asking a favor that they summon him to Jerusalem because they were planning to ambush and kill him on the way. In verse 4, Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself insisted to go there shortly. Now, look at what gamesmanship is being played. The Jews want him dead. They want him to come down so they can kill him. They were tricking him in some ways, Festus in some ways. But he says, no, I'm in charge. He's staying at Caesarea. Because, you know, Caesarea was the Roman capital in that province, and Jerusalem was the Jewish capital. So there were kind of two different competing capitals in Jerusalem at that time, or in Judea at that time. There was Caesarea that was on the coast. There was Jerusalem that was inland. And the Roman people and the Roman governors always had their palaces and their home at Caesarea. That's where they did business. It would be like Sacramento today. And when I was on staff with Crusade, you know, Arrowhead Springs would be like Jerusalem. And you would have one place for the secular authorities, and you would have another place for the religious authorities. And Festus wanted to make sure that they understood that he was in control. So he said, no, I'm not going to give them to you. I don't have to give them to you. And basically he was going, ha, 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 ha. I'm in control here. I know what's going on. I'm going to be in control. I'm going to maintain control. Now, Paul can be a real pest for leaders because he doesn't please men. He doesn't accept bribes. He doesn't give bribes. He simply champions what is true. And so the Jews want Festus to turn him over and execute them because they have determined to kill him. Remember the 40 men, the 40 assassins? They're still around. And then Festus says this. It's amazing that it takes Festus, not the Jews, to state a biblical principle of how we should treat people. Look at what he says. Festus replied, Paul was being kept at Caesarea, that he himself intended to go there shortly, because he said this. Look at verse 5. He says, let the men of authority among you go down with me. If there's anything wrong about a man, let them bring charges against him. In other words, you can't kill this guy without a trial. You're not allowed to kill someone just because you want to kill someone. There is statutes and there's laws. There are ways you handle things when people have done things against you. And that's what Festus is saying. Listen, even Roman citizens